Welcome to the Union Parish Library. This is National Library Week. And so this year for Library Week, we wanted to spend an entire day where we really just promoted some of our local authors. Today I have with me one of our local authors. Her name is Erin Antley, and she's from Downsville. And we're going to talk a little bit about her book, Graveyard Stories, Tales Taken from the Cemeteries of North Louisiana. So welcome.
Oh, thank you.
So tell us where you're from. You're from the Downsville area?
I am. Originally, I grew up in Hale, Louisiana, just outside of Marion.
Okay.
And then once I married, we lived in Farmerville for a long time, and recently we moved to Downsville within the last few years.
Yeah, and you have two children, did you say?
Two children.
Yeah.
One is a senior in high school, and one is a fifth grader.
Now, you're an author, but professionally you are a nurse, you said.
I'm a nurse, yes. I work at Green Clinic in the surgery department.
Okay, and then so you're a nurse, but your book is about graveyard stories. Okay, so how did you make that, how did you get there?
Well, because it's more of a hobby for me to do cemetery research. I've kind of done that for years. My parents were into it. And it was just not an uncommon thing to go and look through old cemeteries. And I picked that up over the years. My grandmother did it. We all did that. And, I found that you could learn a lot of stuff from the gravestones and our local cemeteries. And it also started out in that an avid interest in history. I enjoy reading about local history, but I also wanted to see if there was a tangible connection in that, okay, so this story happened, can I find the grave of this person? And honestly, most of the time we could, and it was very interesting to me to go back into that area and be able to say, hey, this is where they're buried if you want to go, and kind of see, their relatives and all the stories that are there.
Yeah. So your maiden name is Perkins.
Yes.
And so have you done a lot of genealogy work within your family?
I actually have. I've done quite a few generations of genealogy work, and a lot of that was at the urging of my grandmother and my dad. And that really opened up some answers to some mysteries that we had not known the exact connections before, including my dad's connection to South Louisiana. And since that time, I've actually been able to go see the house that my great-great-great-great-grandfather built. It's still standing in Washington, Louisiana to this day. I've met quite a few cousins through that connection, and it's been, I solved a mystery for them. They didn't know where my great-great-grandfather had fallen off the map to, but he was in North Louisiana having married and had children, and they solved the other end of the mystery for me in that, I got to know them and know more about my great-great-grandfather's history.
Well, that's neat. And you and I were talking before we started filming that we figured out I'm fourth cousins with your husband.
Exactly.
But like if I saw him, I don't know that I would know who he is.
Yeah.
So a lot of families have kind of lost that sense of like who we are and where we're from and really some of those stories. And like you said, you and I were talking earlier and you mentioned that even like high school students are studying history, but they don't always make that connection with people that they were related to.
Exactly. They don't really know. And this was something that I have said before many times, that we learn a very generic American history, and we even in Louisiana learn Louisiana state history. But it's so generic, it's so broad. And what happens is that our children, they learn all this. They can quote you line and verse from these history books, but they don't know what happened in their own backyard. And there's some really interesting stories that went on in this part of the country. At the turn of the century, it was kind of a wild place, and they just don't know about it. And there's history all around us. Yeah. And I think once you start teaching them about it, they're like, really excited to learn more about what is here, and I like that connection with the cemeteries. The local Farmerville City Cemetery has a huge old section, and it's well maintained, and you can walk through it, and these are people that settled the town.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was a lot of money here in those days. There are monuments that are extremely expensive that have stood the test of time, and they're just fascinating to go through and read.
Yeah. Well, I've read some of your blog stories, and they're always really, really interesting. Uh, I wonder how did you get to the point to where, okay, you were doing all this research, you were writing these really interesting stories, and then you decided to put it in a book form?
Well, I had a lot of interest expressed by older folks who don't necessarily use the internet. They don't, if they do, they use it for basic means, and they wanted to be able to read it, and I couldn't figure out how to make copies of it. And I finally decided, the best way to do this is going to be to publish the book and to be able to get copies to people who want a copy of it. And that I've found that the elderly group that don't use the internet have loved it. Just having a paper version of the book to sit down and read, instead of having to get on the internet and make it available for them.
Yeah. Now, you went the route to self-press.
Yes.
So as a author, now that you've kind of been through that experience, what was that like?
It's not bad. It's very simple through Amazon. There are other options available. It's not that bad. I think my biggest struggle was with editing. For that part is the really the most tedious part. Other than that, it's not difficult at all to get it up and get it ready for publishing. I think I probably had more problems designing, and I learned a lot of lessons, like, how I want my cover layout and that sort of thing, that the next book that we will be doing is going to be, I say we, I mean me and my kids, because they definitely helped me out with this. They, I know how to do it a lot easier. The first go around is a little difficult, but then after that you kind of learn the routine and the process to it.
So there is going to be a part 2, huh?
Yes, there is.
Is it going to be similar title or
yes,
similar?
Will be.
Yeah.
I had fully intended to get 2019's into its own book,
Mm-hmm.
and then the COVID situation happened as I was trying to get that ready to go to press. So being a nurse, it slowed everything down. It put me behind. Then we went ahead and did 2020, and now I have 2 years I need to combine, in addition to working on next year's already. So it's, we during the month of October, every day we publish a blog post. My children help me out with it, and I do the writing and that sort of thing, and they go out with me to take pictures and help me find things. 2 heads are always better than one when you're looking for something. And we publish it every day in the month of October, so that we kind of try to get people interested in cemetery and history preservation.
Yeah. Well, that's neat. So when you were doing your research, did you run across anything that just like really surprised you? Was any really quirky story?
Oh yes, there's so many that I don't even know. It's so hard to choose from. I think one of which that we ran into, and I came across, and I published really just a small piece about it in the first book, was Percy Savage's missing head. Apparently in 1906, Percy had actually died, I think, in 1903, if I remember correctly. Somebody slipped into Liberty Cemetery near Linville, dug him up, and stole his skull. And as far as I can tell, it's never been recovered. And his family was unaware of this until I published it, and were like, "What do you mean his head's missing?" And I was like, "Well, there's actually an article in the Gazette where his mom, who is Jerusha Crow, who is buried in the Crow Defee Cemetery near Marion, she had remarried, and she had been married next to, I believe, her second husband. She had written a request in the Gazette that the head be returned to them so that they could put it back in the grave, but I don't think it ever was. And the family's kind of been investigating, trying to figure out what actually happened.
Isn't that crazy?
And why anybody would want to steal Percy's head. So
wow.
it was just a strange thing all the way around. I mean, everybody was kind of like, what? So it was an odd thing.
And all that's really started with the cemetery, a stone that you saw that kind of set you off
actually,
a path.
I come across that article, and I was like, wait a minute, and I'm very familiar with that cemetery. It was from maybe 5 miles from where I grew up. I have a lot of relatives buried out there. And I was like, well, hold on a minute. And I was able to find his grave, and I was like, oh my goodness. So he really existed, and his head was really stolen, and but his family was just like, the descendants are like, wait, what? And they had never heard the story, not one time.
Wow. That's funny. Would you have anything in the book that you would mind reading to us? A little short excerpt of one of your stories?
Yeah, I noticed something a while ago. I was, and I should have marked it ahead of time. But I was thinking about the Stowe Cemetery, which is near Ruston. If you're driving past what used to be Max King's farm, if you're driving through there, you see the 2 pastures on both sides of the road. If you're leaving Farmerville and going towards Ruston, if you take time to notice on the left side, you'll see a low rock wall way on the other side of the pasture there. That's the Stowe family cemetery that's out there in the middle of the property. And I was going to try to pull that up right quick. Okay, let's see here. This was in the chapter of some of the cemeteries that were hidden in plain sight. This one is a little harder to spot, but hundreds of people pass it every day on their way to Ruston or Farmerville. Take a look to your left, and you will see on the second ridge a stand of trees. Look a little more closely, and you will spy a low wall built from iron ore rocks. Within that wall is the Stowe family cemetery. According to the stones, the first burial was that of Abraham Stowe in 1829 at the age of 17. He was followed by his married sister Talitha Stowe Anderson in 1830. I believe that Talitha died a few days after giving birth to her namesake, daughter Talitha, who married Willis Wood and lived to the ripe old age of 67, dying in 1906. She's buried there as well. Another sibling, Mary St. Clair Stowe Roan, died a month after giving birth and lies there as well. The parents of this group are John and Dorcas Stowe, who were both born in 1780 in South Carolina and eventually made their way to North Louisiana and established a plantation. However, the grandchildren fared well, and the last person to have been buried on that hollowed hill was Joe S. Roan, whose funeral service was held at the Ruston Hotel. He was a farmer, just as his parents and grandparents had been. He was the justice of peace in Ruston for many years. There they lie in that field all these years, unnoticed by anybody much, except for the occasional black Angus looking for a tasty bit of grass.
That is a neat story, and I imagine that, I think today it does seem like we do have a little bit of disconnect with generations before us, and the cemeteries are really where some of those stories lie.
Yeah. And there's so many that have disappeared. I mean, I've spent years looking for some that I can't find anymore, and we believe that the stones have been moved, and things happen, property lines shift, that sort of thing. For instance, the Ebenezer Cemetery, it would be pretty close to Yaks out there in the woods, over there kind of where the pine tree plantations and that sort of thing are. It appears that those stones were actually moved from that cemetery at one point of a time and placed in Downsville Cemetery. Just the stones. These were people that were buried in the 1700s. A good many of the Brewster family, I think, were buried out there in that area. They were all from kind of in that Cedarton area.
Yeah.
And so, there are a couple of stones, I believe, that are still left out there somewhere, but that's all that remains.
Yeah.
Well,
I know it is helpful. It hasn't always been the case, but not, a couple of years back, all of the cemetery information was compiled and it's available online.
Yes.
So I know that that's helpful, and it's probably not up to date, but a lot of those history. We have a lot of people that visit the library that are coming here from Texas and other places, trying to find their family history, and they start really at the cemetery because that at least gives them birth and death.
Yes.
Period of time.
That actually is something that is a big thing that I actually volunteer for findagrave.com. It's an excellent resource. And for people who live out of state and are unable to, make the trip here, if I can go out and find the grave of a relative, I take pictures for them, I post it online, I send it to them, that sort of thing. And it really helps, and sometimes we can find information from those stones that helps them identify other family members. Most of the time they're buried near each other, so it really helps to go back and do that. So.
Well, that's really neat that you've come from, you've grown up here, but even though you have a career in nursing, that you're really giving back to our community. So we appreciate your time. And then the book, thank you for sharing about that. Now, where can people buy the book?
It's on Amazon.
Okay.
They can buy the digital copy or the paperback copy. I try to keep the price kind of low. I think it's like $7.99 or something like that. I wanted to keep it kind of low so it was, easily accessible, not too expensive for anybody that wanted a copy. It wasn't about making money off of it. I just kind of wanted to share these things that we found over the years because they are fascinating.
Yeah. Well, we've got a copy here at the library that people can check out too if you just want to look at the book. And we're excited to learn more about it and hopefully share with others. And we hope that maybe if you do put out this new book, maybe we could do a little book signing here and invite people to come and learn a little bit more about your latest findings. But thank you very much for your time. We appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.